Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast, Conversations with Silicon Valley's Creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates. Hello, welcome to the Content Magazine podcast. I'm Daniel Garcia, the cultivator of Content Magazine, and we are here today in our sofa studio with Zoë Latzer, and she is the curator director at the Institute of Contemporary Art in San Jose. Did I get your title right, or is there's more? You're like programming something.
Yeah,
too.
Director of Public Programs. Not the director of the ICA.
Right. Not yet.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah, one day.
So it's curator and director of public programs. Okay, so let's start with that, and then we'll work out. So curation. Okay, we pretty much know what that is. But the director of public programs. So what's involved in that part of your job? Yeah,
so at the ICA, we're a really small team, and so we're kind of 5 full-time members or full-time staff members, and then our VSAs as well. So I think first off, just saying, working at a smaller art institution, your hand is in every pot.
Yeah, totally.
So I think it's in one way I do try to run the public programming and kind of our member programming, as well as our more visitor public programming. First Fridays, block parties, artist talks, programming relating to the exhibitions. With being a small team, I also will do visitor services, contracts, work, and kind of work on kind of all the pots in the mix as kind of working in a small institution. But so there's the kind of more curatorial work and then programming, especially relating to exhibitions. Yeah,
that's cool. So I'm always curious. Well, first, congratulations. You just got your master's at California College of Arts, right, in curatorial practice,
yes.
Right? Which is awesome. Congratulations. That's a lot of work. But I'm always interested in what brought someone to be a curator for a museum or a gallery. How did that trajectory start? When you were a kid, you were saying earlier that you played the clarinet, and were you involved in the arts as a youth?
So I grew up actually going to Catholic school in a very rigorous kind of space, and never liked that and the kind of programming I was receiving from that. And so my parents kind of responded and brought me into Waldorf education, which is kind of art-based, often thought of as kind of more hippie kind of structure. But through that, they really focus on arts being the main center of all classes.
So it's kind of like, it's like STEM, but it's even art before it's like
so
STEAM.
It's like every class you would take, I did it 4th grade to senior year, is you create what is a main lesson book. So even if you're in a math class or a history class, you create kind of a book outside of that, really trying to have a comprehensive understanding of the topic. So your essays will go into it, you'll do illustrations, you'll do drawings, you'll do things. And as for me, I'm a visual learner. And so it helps you kind of synthesize in a few different modalities and be able to really understand topics. So my love of art kind of came from that. You know, it was a school where I could take woodworking, I could take stained glass, I could take leatherworking, ceramics, art, and then also even when we were taking, mathematics and biology, it still was incorporating art and visual learning into that. And so that's kind of where it started. And I took an art history class in high school that ended up being what I decided I wanted to do, and finding a love of history through an art lens, and taking something that is often thought of as objective history, and really looking at it through subjective experience, through artist lenses of different times. And also a lot of my curatorial practice is reckoning with certain narratives that I received through my education and through history, and how can we trouble those ideas of history in these very, heteronormative or linear understandings of history through the colonial lens, and what are other ways of understanding history. And so that always just started my interest in art history.
That's
and then
so cool.
and then I grew up traveling with my parents and going to a lot of different places and kind of seeing the power of art across cultures, whether that's in Mexico or Italy, and just seeing how important art and culture is to our foundation of life.
Totally, yeah.
And then I decided to do my undergrad at UC Santa Cruz.
Did you grow up in this area pretty much?
I grew up outside of Sacramento.
Sacramento, okay.
So I wanted to go farther away from my parents,
but
not too far.
Yeah.
And I ended up choosing it. I was going to go to New York and do a private school, but I didn't grow up with money, and so it was really important to me to not take on loans as much as possible.
Yeah, totally.
And UC Santa Cruz pretty much offered me a full ride at the time, so I was like, I have to do this.
Yeah.
Or UC Davis, but that was a little too close.
Yeah.
A little too close to me. So I went to UC Santa Cruz and did the History of Art and Visual Cultures program there, as well as art. And then I never finished my art major because I ended up getting into kind of ecology. Side. Well, I ended up getting more into like natural history and ecology as well.
All right.
And I studied abroad, so it just like made it.
Where'd you study?
I studied in London,
cool.
And I did a Sotheby's Institute of Art, which is like an art and business kind of school, branching off of the auction house. And I did an internship at White Cube, which is a really big gallery.
Awesome.
And so I spent a half year there.
Yeah.
But the History of Art and Visual Culture program is not focused on just a European focus or contemporary focus. It's kind of like world culture where you have to take a class from every region, as well as integrating kind of visual culture, so like media, memes.
Memes, right?
There's actually a professor who focuses on memes there.
That's interesting.
And architecture, and really trying to look at history of art through a more comprehensive lens.
So you can understand the culture and the society through their art and stuff like that.
And understanding the divisions we've created through fine art and like culture or low art or
folklore,
craft. And really trying to break that apart. And then and it wasn't necessarily focused on contemporary art, but when we did discuss contemporary art, it was artists who are really, especially the 90s kind of identity politics, like James Luna or Fred Wilson, and looking at the history of representation and how they don't fit into those narratives. And there's a scholar there, Jennifer Gonzalez, who wrote Subject to Display, which was really foundational for me, looking at kind of contemporary artists responding to history, responding to representation, and kind of pushing out of those boundaries.
Yeah, that's cool. So then, I mean, it's so interesting that at, going from high school and into college, starting into college at Santa Cruz, like even like you were so focused, is kind of interesting because it feels like a lot of curators kind of like stumble into it. So because what was, when you were doing like the art major part of it, or what were you doing? What was your medium that you're involved in as far as like the practice part?
Yeah, I was really into, a few different mediums. I really liked sculpture and painting, but I didn't do them enough to really feel like I was, finding ground. I also did a lot of photography classes, which I still love to do, film photography. And that's always been still kind of critical, but it's definitely been something that I've missed and have been wanting to get back into. But where I think it informs my curatorial practice is my love of installation art and I think what I'm really interested in as a curator is world building and storytelling and coming in with an artist and helping them like explore the world that they want to discuss and be a part of that world building.
That whole process.
And I think that's where my creative outlet right now resides, is like working with an artist, bringing something to life, creating an environment where audiences really get to engage and explore like their senses and haptic kind of touch and different ways of like belonging or being in the world.
Yeah, that's cool. So you said you traveled a lot when you were younger with your parents and your family and stuff like that. Well, one, do you have siblings and stuff like that? And why did you guys travel? What was and where did you travel to? Europe or just national parks?
Yeah, I have 3 older siblings, so I'm the youngest of 4, which I think informs me a lot, being the baby. Who says it doesn't? I think it does. But We always travel. My mom grew up as an army kind of brat.
Okay. Yeah.
And so she had traveled through that.
Right.
And then always just wanted that as kind of a lens of understanding. I think growing up in Sacramento, it's mostly kind of white neighborhoods or like Ukrainian. There's just a lot of influence that I've seen. Sacramento still has a lot of diversity, but I grew up on the outskirts, not in Sacramento.
Like what was the
I need to say, I grew up 40 minutes from Sacramento.
Oh, so what was the actual name of the little...
I grew up in Loomis, which is a
sure.
small town off 80 East, like if you're making your way to the foothills.
Do your parents
to
still
Tahoe.
live out there in Loomis?
They do,
Oh, okay.
They still live out there.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting thinking about that history because in our current exhibition, we have a piece by Related Tactics, who is thinking through the Chinese labor and the railroad.
Right.
And they start in actually Sacramento and take photographs every 2 miles for every 3 Chinese laborers' deaths.
Oh, wow.
All the way to Iowa.
Wow.
So I've actually been rethinking about Loomis as this kind of, because it did have a Chinatown at the center that's not there anymore, as well as San Jose used to have a Chinatown that was burned down.
Yeah,
And the San Jose fire department did nothing.
Yeah, people
very
stood
little
and watched.
Yeah.
Even.
Did very little to do anything to change that history. So revisiting these places in California and history. And
what is Loomis kind of known for? I feel like, is it farmland or is it?
It's rural, It's like farmland.
Yeah.
There's like one tiny, like 2-block downtown.
Yeah, okay.
But it's definitely more of like that cusp of kind of gold mining area. Like Auburn is very much more gold mining kind of country, but it did have a lot of Chinese railroad workers, and it did have a Chinatown. But now it's still definitely like not as developed. It's not the suburbs of like Folsom or Roseville, though it's becoming more sought after. But it's rural. There's cows and horses and pigs. And,
so then when you traveled with your parents as a kid, what was one trip or one memory maybe that kind of like stuck out to you of where you've gone?
Ooh, that's hard. I mean, I think we've traveled, a good amount through, Guatemala, through Mexico, and went to Greece and Italy.
Wow, cool.
I think one thing that was, formative in terms of like more of a structured art history was being in Florence and with my American accent and seeing the David for the first time. And even though that's very like Michelangelo, this big kind of part of art history, but the seeing the monumental size of one person making a sculpture that big and that powerful really had an impact on me to see the and we learned about this in my undergrad, but like the aesthetic, the sublime quality that art has and architecture has. Cathedrals have this impact and this effect on people, and the spaces that are created through art and through architecture, are important and do impact art and culture. And so I think that as just an understanding of like the power of art was really interesting for me.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's cool. Now you seemed like, so you were in Santa Cruz. It seems like you do have like an affinity for the beach or something like that. I mean, living in Loomis, but you've traveled, but then going to like Santa Cruz, how did Zoe change from being in Loomis to being at Santa Cruz? What was it in that developmental time of your...
Yeah, I think Santa Cruz is formative for a lot of people. And a lot of also like counterculture culture through its history. I think for me, I was also looking at UCLA and a few other New York, and I think the pressure of like beauty and standards of beauty on women, I was glad to have Santa Cruz as like a place where that's not as of value. And like your personality is of value.
You can be a person, a whole person.
And I think what was really formative is I just really found my love of nature And not that necessarily informs all of my curatorial practice, but Santa Cruz is redwoods, you have ocean, you have endless hiking miles, you have, fairy ponds and pools. And I just really feel like I found my love of nature and like the magic that nature supplies people and that kind of quality and how impactful that is for me and for others was, I think, just really formative in terms of being in Santa Cruz and having a slower kind of way of life that isn't quite as city. And now I live in San Francisco, and I didn't think I would. I didn't think I would like San Francisco because I was like, oh, it's going to be too busy, and I love it. The walking and the biking, you get to walk everywhere and bike everywhere versus Santa Cruz, you can't. And I didn't realize like how much of a walkable city really does also impact you.
I love it.
And I thought I could only get that by like walking by the beach every morning. But you can't. You can find it in other ways.
I always tell people that like I feel like cities actually there's way more community than in rural areas and stuff because like you go to the same little market, you go to the same coffee shop, and you walk all over the place. I love it. And even riding public transit and like seeing the view, I don't know, it's very therapeutic for me. But my wife, like, she likes to go hiking in the woods, and I'm like, okay, I saw a redwood tree before, I'm fine.
Really? I love it. I would go to the redwoods every day if I could. So then,
now you started doing yoga, I guess. Did you do it in Loomis in high school, or did that start in Santa Cruz? And then you were also involved in, I'm not that super familiar, Ayurveda?
Ayurveda.
So when did that all begin? What is that? How did that form you and shape you? And do you still do that now?
I think both of those things I started really, kind of in high school. I think my first yoga class was like at 24 Hour Fitness. But they're both really old philosophies. Yoga and Ayurveda are sister sciences that originate from the Vedic cultures of India and are still kind of influenced the kind of culture there and have spread worldwide. I think what I like about them both is they're both about tuning into our environment, and Ayurveda especially is the science of life, the science of the body, and tuning in to the rhythms of the seasons and to what we're consuming and where we are in life, and really trying to slow down and be in touch with the nature of ourselves. And the same with yoga. In a way, I also just like it because it's very fun and allows me to explore art within my own body in a way. But that's pulling it out from yoga and Ayurveda. But I've always loved them, and I think that they are just really old philosophies that have a lot of wisdom. And I think Western medicine is, they're both, you need both sides of it, but looking at other practices as accompanying it, and like home remedies or things that can support you through health, I just find is also supporting communities, and things like turmeric or things that people have been having since millennia, really, like having these practices and not stepping out of a binary of like this is right or this is the correct medicine, and looking at also like what people have been doing for generations, and Chinese medicine, all of these practices that have been around for such a long time.
It's kind of fun to see some of those kind of practices that have been going on in cultures for a long time, and then seeing like, oh, they actually work. Like I know my grandmother would always, like, if you had a stomach ache, she would just take a tortilla and burn it and give it to you with some water to drink, right? And then so we find out that like the charcoal or something like that actually helps your stomach with some, so it's like those weird, like they didn't know what, I don't think they knew what they were doing, but it worked, so they did it. Go ahead.
But stepping out of this, they don't know what they're doing.
Well,
and like I think that's also what I'm interested.
They didn't know the science behind it, but it works. So obviously, if it works, right?
And I think that's what I'm also inspired by in my curatorial practice is like stepping out of the like I know or I don't know, and this like or you know and I know because I have the research.
Right.
And I think with those medicines, it's also like, yeah, now Western medicine is catching up and doing studies to support those things,
Right.
you know?
To give it a stamp of approval.
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah. And it's like, or it was
Yeah.
already, had knowledge, had its backing for 5,000 years of knowledge. And how can we kind of step out of those, like, I know or I don't know as well?
Yeah, it is kind of funny because they develop a new drug with chemicals and stuff like that, and they have to do all this testing to see if it's actually work. And then yet you have all these kind of like home remedies or things that have been people doing in culture that have been working for years and years, right? Yeah. So
there's just so much we don't understand about the body, and only in recent years have we had an understanding of like the vagus nerve and how much your gut impacts your brain, and this like gut brain connection, and how much of your serotonin is actually like 90% is made in your gut, and like what you eat impacts your brain. And I think, I don't know, Western medicine is just kind of catching up to like the importance of those things, where it's been kind of like these are connected. Now we're understanding why, but there is so many things that we just don't know.
So a solid diet of hot dogs isn't good for me.
Love a hot dog.
So then like, the reason I want to kind of bring that up because, just kind of like the connection between the mind, body, and the spirit, the soul, right? And so you've kind of dabbled in that with the kind of like the yoga and the other practices. How does Zoe, which means life, right? How do you bring that into your curatorial practice? Like, how does like your grounding yourself give you a perspective and a uniqueness as a curator?
Yeah, I think in terms of really being, really open and interested in world building and storytelling, and something that's been really impactful for me as a curator is Kathy Park Hong, in her book Minor Feelings, Reckonings by Asian Americans, is this term she brings up by filmmaker Trinity Minha, which is instead of speaking about or something outside of your culture, it's also about speaking nearby. And she brings it up within her film practice and her as a filmmaker and her theories. But this idea of an ethical stance within filmmaking, which I take into a curatorial way, of rather than speaking on top of someone or about someone or for someone, speaking nearby, speaking in proximity to people. And I think that's what I really like to think about in terms of being a curator, working with artists, is uplifting, working together, helping them bring their vision to life, and helping that take that next stage into kind of more world building or storytelling, and allowing each kind of moment in time or like allowing that gap or suspension in knowing to allow the other people to kind of fill it in and let them speak for themselves.
So would you say that in some way, as a curator, then you see yourself, you're providing just like a platform for the artist's voice to be heard? Is that in general just kind of like if you had to bring it down to like a simple sentence for a simple person like you?
I think so, and a facilitator in a lot of ways. I mean, I think that there's more. There is writing. There is certain ways that I need to be explaining or the more traditional curatorial roles. But I do want to see myself as a facilitator, as someone working with people, not on top of people, but in that proximity of working to build something with someone and facilitate something.
Yeah. Okay. So what would be then for you, like, if you were thinking in terms of exhibition that you're putting together, what would a successful, like what would make you happy? Like, what would you be like, yeah, we nailed it. What would that look like? What would be some of the elements and outcomes that you would want to see?
Well, I think within that, it's not only leaving space for the artist's voice, but also audiences' voices. Right. And as thinking through stepping out of the I know or I don't know, which is a very typical curatorial role, is, this explicator, this explanation machine for institutions or curators to
yeah.
be like, you don't know this, I'm teaching you this,
Right.
but to move into...
So you would say in the sense of like, even like, when you look at this work, look at it this way or like that, rather than doing that
that's
kind of...
definitely a part of the
Yeah.
role, but and an essay that's been impactful is Take Care by Anthony Huberman, who was the curator and director of the Wattis Institute, and he has this essay where he talks about moving from I know and I don't know to I care
Yeah,
by art critic Jan Vowert. I might be saying his name wrong, but thinking of the I care as the important part there for as a
totally.
curator.
Yeah.
And while I still need to explain things and I still need to describe things or
Yeah.
place things into context, that as a core of the curatorial practice, like I care and I want to listen and I want to create environments for people. And if speaking nearby isn't just for artists, but it's also for visitors. It's also for allowing spaces for people to come in and share their knowledge. And I don't, I am one person and people have so many diverse, and people who have, been in San Jose for so long or are 80 years old or have these different cultural or historical references that I just don't have. And so how can that would be an end goal, would be like, how can I create a space where an artist's voice is heard, visitors feel like they can contribute, that there are things that are impactful for them that they can share. And that's been also just really beautiful to see develop, is creating space for dialogue, creating space for community, creating space for people to learn. I think at the core, I'm learning is like my joy. And I didn't learn certain things in my, very especially Catholic upbringing, and very structured school. Like I didn't learn a lot of history. I didn't learn about San Jose burning down or
totally.
Loomis, being a site for Chinese workers and the death and the toll and the disposable labor that happened. Maybe it was a mention, but and not learning these things through our history books. And also trying to have artists that are really thinking through research-based practices, delving into topics, and having, I don't know, I think that's the foundation of learning. But in terms of like space, I also love environments and installation and helping an artist, whether they're a painter or a sculpture, really bring it into more of space creation, and how can what they're discussing have more impact on visitors, and how can visitors maybe engage with it or get more of an understanding of what they're trying to communicate.
So then for the audience then, what is the impact of art?
Ooh.
And how do you see, what would you like to see your role in that impact?
I think art has a huge role. And I think historically art has been extremely critical. I mean, we've seen how, Hitler used art both to increase nationalism and to, create Jewish kind of quote unquote degenerate art, and created like linear forms of museums where you would walk through and it's like Jewish art, and I come from a Jewish ethnicity, and then to be like, okay, this is progress to German nationalism, and
they even had board games and stuff like that.
And he failed. He didn't get into Jewish art school, which is like
art
historian. Maybe that's why his hate started. Is from art, and not getting into an art school. Jokingly, but it's been used as a tool. A tool of communication for nationalism, for propaganda, and also to communicate really important time periods and to suggest what is important.
So I guess I'm going to just keep your thought, but I'm just saying, like, so then, what you're talking about. So because sometimes even when, as I said, we say art, but we're talking in some ways aesthetics, right? And then how aesthetics subconsciously or consciously communicate messages and then change. So, okay, but now go on.
Well, I think it's both. I mean, yeah, he used a lot of like messaging and propaganda, and he did his design himself.
Yeah.
But also taking artist paintings and putting them in a museum and having that be a linear conversation to show the past and the present. Create narrative. And we saw that with Manifest Destiny, of creating narratives of like, go west, have this profit, have this exploits, and they would place, Native Americans in the foreground to signalize the past, and these telephone wires and these signals of progress, of the sublime and these things. And even I took a class and we're talking about how photographers of Yosemite, of these kind of big historical monuments were used as marketing devices.
They were promoting the national parks.
But also the removal of people and trees and people. So, I think like for me it is media and it's a disbursement of art, but it's also very tangible art too that has been used to create narratives and to support certain narratives. So I think art is really critical, and visual literacy alongside that is really important as well, especially as we move through like a time of AI and people are really questioning what they're seeing or not seeing, and how are our visual world being really manipulated in that way. Not that I like go super into like the confusion of AI, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist too hard. But I think it is really important to have a critical lens in a world where we're going to be more and more confused by what is real, and narratives are, there's a lot of propaganda and narrative building, and our nation is also built off of history books and narratives, and so looking at also, I think what I like is contemporary artists who take really complex stances of looking at their own history, their own selves as archives, their own family archives, of very specific histories, and bringing them to discussion and
So then you see so then where's your role then in that kind of like for the good and the bad, or the whatever that art and propaganda and aesthetics play? What how are you positioning yourself, and what do you see yourself kind of doing in that conversation with the culture?
I don't want to take an ego approach to it, because
do you have like a revolutionary or a,
I'm
talking about, you know what I mean, like a change the past, or forge this direction, or what would you say? Is there a mission behind it?
No, I don't think I have necessarily a mission at this point in my life. I'm still in my 20s, so I don't know. I don't want to get too ego or too thinking that I'll change the world in any capacity. I think that's like up to communities and supporting communities to make real change as well, as using your individual voice. But I'm really interested in artists, especially who are interested in thinking of different possibilities for the future, different ways of relating, using mythologies or different like world building techniques to think about different approaches to relating to others, to our environment, to our future. And so I think that's kind of where I'm really interested in. It's less about my personal vision for the future, but allowing artists to envision different possibilities. I think we're going to need artists in the fusion and the imagination, and like our systems, to be frank, are failing. Our government's failing. People are losing a lot of trust within these systems. Like our education, all art schools are kind of closing. And I think that there's a problem of, not trusting these institutions and them not working. And capitalism is failing, right? We can't continue the way that we have thought we could have continued. So I think artists, for me, are just a place, and not didactically or, revolutionarily, but I think that they are a place where we need visionaries, and we need people to envision a different way of relating to other people, and to history and to potential, and that's what I'm interested in right now.
That's cool. I can see that. I mean, it's just the space, it makes for the space for the dialogue to be introspective and to like look at ourselves and look at culture, look at where have we been, where are we going. It's like it can put a pause, right? So when you walk into the Institute of Contemporary Art in San Jose on South First Street, where you're the curator and program director of, you can have a pause, right, to get to think. Now you have a current exhibition going on. Which is you kind of alluded to a couple times. What is the moment of reflection that you guys are presenting and you've presented with that show? Tell us a little bit about what's going on there now.
Yeah, first, before going into our current show, I just want to say on that pause is I think really important for me. And there's a few theorists and queer theorists that are thinking like Jack Halberstam or Jose Esteban Munoz, and really thinking of that space creation and like queer temporality and like the suspension of time and space from these like linear and heteronormative structures. And they're more eloquent than me, but they really discuss this potential of suspension in time and where play comes into place and creating moments of time that people can explore and have dialogue and play and imagine different possibilities, especially queerness as like a liberatory framework from like bell hooks. Just on that note, I think that is really important, is creating just moments of pause, creating moments of space, creating moments of dialogue. Right. And then within our newest exhibition, curated by Judy Dennis and me from Montalvo, Montalvo Arts Center came to us from the Lucas Artist Residency Program, really wanting to reflect on their own history. The Montalvo was owned by Senator Phelan, who was a big part of the Asian Exclusion Acts, both in California and just nationwide, and did a lot of horrible, very racist acts, and the kind of history of Montalvo becoming this artist residency, and artists also having to reckon with the places that have history of violence or exclusion. So we selected 9 artists and 3 collectives from the Lucas Artist Residency Program of Asian American heritage, and they're thinking through their relationship to the places and the spaces that they've inhabited, often filled with violence or histories of exclusion, and how that in turn kind of impacts, transforms, or changes their art practice. Cool.
So then now is it, so you have some works at the ICA, but then is also Montalvo having some exhibition up there too, or how's it all working? I really don't know.
They're doing a 20th anniversary book. So they're having a book that is more comprehensive of the 20-year Lucas Artist Residency Program, because there's hundreds of artists that have done that program. And then we're going to do programming at Montalvo. Because Montalvo is huge.
It's beautiful,
It's beautiful. It's really big. So we're going to do a film series with Titi Takamoto and Genevieve Quick, who are both filmmakers, who I love their practice so much, but they didn't quite fit into the theme of relating to place. And then they'll be moderated by Abby Chen, who's a curator at the Asian Art Museum. And then we're ending in a symposium at Montalvo, thinking through 2 themes that I think are really important coming from this show. The first being how are institutions reckoning with their own histories of exclusion or racism or violence, especially with Montalvo, like how our curators, directors, even board members really thinking through reckoning with that history and moving forward and paying artists. How are they thinking versus just erasing that history? For me, I'm interested in that dialogue of how it's changed over time. I think Catherine Opie, who's an artist, has been influential. She did a series of photographing monuments, like colonial monuments, and there was one, I'm just blanking on the name, it's a Confederate soldier, and during BLM protests for George Floyd, people like tagged it, and there was a whole discussion like, do we just remove the whole monument, or keep the tags and keep the layers of history? And that's what I'm interested in, not just like the removal of this object, but like the layers and the protests and the resistance to those things as like the interest for me. because I don't think it's a question of just like forgetting that history.
Right.
It is so important to California and things that I didn't learn as much as a child growing up in California, and adding to it, you know, and thinking through different ways of relating. And then the second program will be thinking through the term Asian American and how and it will be curators and writers from the Bay Area primarily. Who are like these specialists. They've been thinking through this through their career.
Sure,
And where is that, you know, terminology? It came out of late 1960s from Berkeley, UC Berkeley, as a protest to Vietnam, and to have a kind of category of visibility of being like, no, Asian Americans do exist.
Right.
And it came from a very Bay Area focus and center, and that term kind of was coined at that time and then moved throughout the kind of world, or at least the U.S. And so thinking through that as an important category in a way of visibility, but also how can that be troubled? How can these categories be broken apart and troubled? And I love that idea of troubling things, and how can something be helpful in certain ways and really not helpful in other ways, and through that troubling those kind of categories.
That's cool. It's cool. Even when you think about like the non-binary kind of like thinking, you know what I mean, like the hyphen Asian American, Mexican American, African American, all that kind of stuff, was to say like no, like America isn't just this, it's also these other things. But I know there's people that would dispute about like the division also that creates too. So, So it's kind of an interesting topic. So it'll be fun. And when's that symposium?
There'll be August 11th.
August 11th, so down the road a little bit,
And looking at these things not as like monolithic identities, and like many people don't identify as them. Or my partner's mom is from Trinidad, and she's like, I'm not African American. Like, I'm from Trinidad. I'm a Caribbean. You know, I'm from the Caribbean.
American.
And so like, she's like, oh, I hate when I'm coined that when I'm like not, you know, and that's a stepmom. But it's just like, I think those conversations are important and really nuanced and complex.
That's the thing. I think that's the thing is like life is in general is way more. There's way more complexity than the simple this or that, not that, you know what I mean? And it's more, I always use the word dynamic. Like the world is very dynamic, and we have to think in terms of like paradox and those kind of things rather than just linear and stuff. So for you, if you were to grab you could have any piece of artwork you wanted to have in your home, what would you choose? Or a couple of them, because I know like, or even maybe what's something you talked about, seeing the David statue. Is there any, what's kind of like a couple pieces or artists that have really kind of like you either go back to or you love, you know what I'm talking about, that kind of influencer or whatever.
I mean, there's so many artists if I was wealthy that I would have in my home. I think some that are coming up are, and this is just out of visual interest, like Dietrich Brackens. He actually did his I think master's at San Jose State. He's a weaver, and builds these beautiful weavings with silhouettes. I just love his work. And I'm a big textile texture person.
Cool,
so I would love one of his pieces. But Eamon Oregiron is also a painter. He had an exhibition at, I don't know if I'm saying his name correct, but he had an exhibition at the Anderson. And he uses like gold and these huge, like literally the size of a whole wall paintings. You'll have to kind of see them. I'll show you later, but they are just spectacular and beautiful. And I went to Frieze LA this past few weeks, and I saw one of his, but in mosaic. And those are more just, I think they're both very interesting practices as well as just visually. I just love their practices. So much.
And what was it that attracted you to those two pieces? Would you say what did it? I'm gonna leave it.
I think they both tap into a lot of history and a lot of narrative building. and these are just two artists that I like, but Diedrich Backens thinks through like the history of like black silhouettes. Same with like Kara Walker.
Okay.
A lot of artists who have been thinking through the silhouette. Kara Walker kind of coming before and being this much bigger artist, and thinking through the silhouette and like antebellum South art and the kind of darker side of the antebellum South, and she kind of really foregrounded the silhouette as an importance within especially like black media and literacy, but he takes it into his weaving style, and I think just from someone who did his master's at San Jose, it just has been interesting to see his kind of career develop and into kind of more textiles and weaving practices, and then Giron Ore Giron, he had a show at the Anderson, and he thinks through kind of more Latin American heritage, but takes it into his own kind of visual language. And they placed his work where he uses gold paint next to, I'm forgetting exactly the history, but like a gold item from kind of like colonial times that is in the Anderson collection, and placing these things in context to each other.
Totally.
And the same with Fred Wilson, like his work in, I mean, he's from the 90s, but like mining the museum and placing like slave chains next to silverware and how that like broke the museum world at the time. And the kind of juxtaposition and conversation between history and now. Those are just two random examples. I don't think I summed up their practice very well.
No, that's cool. Yeah, that's good. No, that's good because it even shows like kind of like your interest in kind of like the space, and then it, you know, in the place, and then the audience experience, as well as like the method and the story. So yeah, like a curator. I always get that wrong. Okay. Last thing, what is on your playlist these days? What are you listening to? What's on
music-wise?
Yeah.
Ooh. Well, this may be more basic, but I love Hosier.
Oh, yeah.
Hosier? I don't know how to say it.
No one knows how to say it. He doesn't even say it the same.
He just created like a little EP, and I have been enjoying that. That's just like what...
and they just released a new album, right? Did
it
just come out?
Like a few songs too. And I think for me, for music, maybe similarly to art, like the very emotive quality of music. And his also just makes me feel like sad in the depths of emotion. So that's...
Do you like that? Do you like just like a...
I love a sad song.
A sad song and a cup of coffee and a...
Even if I'm happy.
Cold walk in the San Francisco
fog. And they've done studies that have showed that it actually doesn't make people sad listening to sad songs. It makes people feel like more belonged. Like belonging and community, and other people feel that way.
Connection.
So even if I'm not feeling sad, I still like to listen to
I like a good
songs.
Melancholy song. Okay. And then, so you mentioned you have a partner, but your family, and you're the youngest of the four. What's some words that the people close to you use to describe you?
Ooh. I would say maybe passionate.
Passionate.
I would say like learning oriented. Like I've always been really intrigued by like facts and knowledge. I don't know what that word would be.
Curious.
Curious.
I would say curious.
Passionate and curious.
And have any of those? Do they have any of those have like a double swordness to them? Where one, it's like, oh yeah, that's really cool, but also, they kind of hurt you a little bit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, oh, you just want to learn, right? You know, I'm just curious because I have.
I think I try to trouble it of like stepping in from the I know and I don't know, right? It's like learning can be like, okay, I have this fact, have this knowledge, and I just want to share it.
Know it all.
And that is definitely a side of it. Been told that before.
Okay, all right,
And and also just like I just like want to share, and I find these things so interesting, so I come at it in a really passionate and curious way. But there can be a double-edged sword where people are like, well, I didn't care to learn that, you know, and you're like, okay.
So you're driving in the car with somebody. Did you know that the railroad that went through there, like,
You're like, okay, I don't need to know. But I find that just so interesting. And I like to be around people who are also just wanting to learn and dive into things. So yeah, passionate and curious.
That's good.
And I would say maybe adventurous as well.
Okay.
I try to be adventurous.
Yeah, cool. Let's end it with here. What's the next adventure that you're going on? You've finished a master's.
Ooh.
You're now in a very great position. But what's for you? What's for Zoe like the next adventure that you're looking at? You know what I mean? Because you have milestones, and what's the next adventure?
Ooh, I think it's less of like an adventure in that way. I think it's actually more
Conquering the self.
Yeah, one day reach enlightenment. But I think it's right now in my career, it's also just the practice and the time, the dedication to things and showing up and working and being community. And, I think when you're traveling or adventuring in those typical ways, they're enlightening and they're beautiful, but you kind of sometimes miss the work of your schedule, the showing up for your routine, the things that are important to creating change in your life. So I think actually right now, especially in my career, it's like working, getting experience with more artists, looking at exhibitions, and being able to try to also understand the art world more, going to more like art fairs, working more studios. And I also just like always enjoy exploring in nature. So trying to kind of explore LA more, explore the kind of Bay Area more. And San Jose, there's so much history and people and culture even in one spot. So I think it's actually less outward and more routine, more getting to know place. Yeah,
that's cool. Kind of like a grounding, and that's cool. Also, one last question, and then we'll officially end. Okay. What book have you read recently that you've enjoyed and that you'd want to share with people?
Ooh, I think there's been a few. So Minor Feelings was really impactful by Kathy Park Hong to our exhibition at the ICA place, Reckonings by Asian American Artists. Ones that I've really enjoyed as well are On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong.
I like the title, for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of a queer novel of I think he's Vietnamese and his relationship to his mother and growing up, and he's kind of a poet. I love that book so much, and it's he's just an amazing writer. So I would say On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous.
Okay, cool. So thank you very much, Zoe, for taking time to be with us today. And make sure that you check out the current exhibit at the Institute of Contemporary Art in San Jose. That's a project along with Montalvo Arts Center. And the name of the exhibition is?
Place Reckonings by Asian American Artists.
So thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks, Zoe.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the South Bay creatives.